now going to hand it over to Hallie. So Hallie, I will get this poll out of your way and hand it over to you.
Great, thank you. As she said, my name is Hallie, and I'm coming to you from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, at Louisiana State University. And my job today is to tell you a little bit about the tree fund. Could we have the first or the second slide? We've got some slides. Yes, they're embedded. As Megan told you, I have been with the tree fund since 2009. But I was associated with the tree fund a little bit before that. I was a bicycle rider on the Tour de Trees, which is one of our keystone fundraisers for the tree fund. And the tree fund is a nonprofit organization that raises money to support research on urban trees and arboricultural practices. And we also support education programs. So if we could go on with the next slide. And I'll tell you a little bit about those programs.
You can use the arrow keys. I don't know if they're not working, but go ahead and click down on the bottom left arrow keys to advance the slide.
Okay. All right, yeah. Oh, I can do that.
There you go. So great.
All right, good. Now we're cooking with gas. Okay, so we look to support a lot of different kinds of research. Some of our programs support young researchers. Some are specific to the topic that's being supported. And we also really try to promote young people coming into the fields of arboriculture and urban forestry research and management. My arrows there. We get our money from individual and corporate donations. We get it from the Still Tour de Trees, which is the bicycle ride I mentioned that I had gotten started with early on before I ever got involved with the board. We also have some auctions, and we also have other donor programs. If you would like to have more information about the tree fund after the presentation by Dr. Bassick, I would be just delighted to tell you about it. We have given almost upwards to $3 million since 2002. Last year we awarded a little bit more than $300,000. We support our areas of concentration, root and management, soil management, planting and establishment, health care for trees and other plants, and we're also just really kicking off some work where we'll be supporting risk assessment and worker safety research. We've got lots and lots of researchers from all over the country, all over the world, who've had success in writing winning proposals for these programs that are listed on the slide. Highland Johns, John Dooling, Jack Kimmel, which is a newer program that's supported by the Canadian Tree Fund. These tend to be fairly small numbers. We also have a fellowship that we support at $100,000 level, which we put out an RFP for this program not every single year, about every other year, every 3 years. As I said, we also have some undergraduate scholarship programs, and these are to support young people coming into the industry, and there are some fine applicants. We also have education programs. A couple of different education programs. The thing that these programs have in common is that we're supporting education that serves students in the K through 12 range, so they could be anything from project learning tree type activities to a few years ago we supported a program that was helping people with physical disabilities get actually into saddles and into trees as climbers. It was we see everything under the sun come into the office as proposals, and so it's very exciting for me to be part of this program that supports this type of work. With that, I'd like to turn the program over to Nina Bassick. Again, I will be with you throughout the presentation so that if you do have questions, further questions about the research we've supported or the tree fund in general, I'm here to answer those questions. Nina, ta-da!
Hello everybody. Thank you very much, Hallie, and thank you, Megan, and all the folks there who asked me to speak today. I'm delighted to be here, and really amazed at look at the participants from all over the country, from the West Coast, and the East Coast, South, all different parts of the country are on this call. So I will hope to address some of their issues that will be common to all of us, and let's get started. So urban environments are complicated. We're looking at this slide and you say basically we've got trees here, we've got lots of people doing things, having a great time under the trees, but it's a very difficult thing to try to get trees to grow to their envisioned design size so they're going to give us the benefits for which we plant them in many of these built-up environments. And when we talk about urban, we're not just talking about big cities. We're talking about any place where there's roads and paved roads and houses and sidewalks and parking lots and any kind of human impacted landscape other than agriculture. So a lot of the places where all of us live. So it's an important thing to think about, and most of my work for the last 35 or so years has been looking at the problems of growing plants in cities. So there's my focus, the work of my group really is focused on the beginning part, the landscape establishment process for trees, and it's my strong feeling that if you do things right at the beginning, you're going to have better results later on, you're going to have better effects, you're going to have less maintenance and less dieback and problems later on. So it's really key that we do things right when we try to establish trees in the urban environment rather than try to play catch up later on. And this process is a four-step process. It doesn't matter where you are in the world. It's the same kind of issues. We still first need to understand our site conditions for site assessment, and we're arrow here. Yeah, there we go. Site assessment, which is basically understanding the conditions around your planting, what you hope to plant, what the soil is like, what the above ground sites are like. And then once we understand that, and that's a really important step to go through, then we can make either appropriate plant selections or deal with soil volume issues, which are going to be the greatest restriction for most urban trees. And the better we can make our greater soil volumes, the better plant selections we're going to have. So the more we can increase our site conditions or ameliorate our site conditions, the better plant selection. And then finally, transplanting is key. Getting those plants off to a good start in the first 3 years is really key to getting a good plant established. So all these 4 steps are what I call the landscape establishment process. But we're going to basically touch a little bit on site assessment, but mostly look at plant selection and greater soil volume issues today. So when we look at plant selection, we're basically talking about genetic potential of a tree. A tree has a genetic potential like all living things. There's a potential to grow to a certain size, canopy, volume, and so on, given all the optimal resources that it can get in terms of water, oxygen, nutrients, appropriate temperatures, and so on. And what we're seeing in the top left picture is a London plane tree, and there's a kind of little person at the bottom. That's me. And this is showing a London plane tree going to its true genetic potential. And on the bottom right, you'll see virtually the same genetic material, the same London plane tree, Platanus exacerofolia, in a very urban street environment. And the environmental reality causes that tree to grow much more poorly than what the potential would be. So we need to think about what the potential is of many of these trees that we're going to be looking at, and how we can best match up the potential with the environmental reality that we see. So just briefly looking at the site, adaptability to site, it's really key that we look at some basic issues. And wherever we are, and there are people in all different parts of the country that have very different conditions than we do here in New York, that we understand those. We need to know what our cold hardiness is, what our zone is. Here we are in New York. I'm in Ithaca, I'm zone 5B, which means trees have to tolerate minus 15 degrees Fahrenheit most winters. If you're some places where you got a lot of summer heat, you need to understand if your plants can tolerate some of that really important summer heat. We need to know about space above ground and below ground, what your utility conflicts might be what there might be basements and all kinds of hidden things below ground that are always interesting to find. Above ground, of course, you've got all kinds of built buildings and signage and so on. You need to understand how much space you have. What's the envelope of space that you have to put this tree into? And then sun, shade, microclimates, precipitation. How much rainfall do you get in the general in your area? These are the big picture things. When we get to microclimates, then we can see some different examples, I'll show you in a minute. But again, how much sun, how much shade. For trees, we're talking about at least 4 to 6 hours of direct sunlight a day to allow those trees to grow to their genetic potential. They are the top parts of our canopy and they need the sun. Big issue, wet or dry soil conditions. This is going to be a key for, and it's what the focus of this talk is, on how much drought or wet soil conditions can these trees deal with. And there are some strategies I'm going to be talking about both from the plant selection and the soil parts that hopefully will address this. Soil pH, nutrients, and salts, those are also important features to be thinking about. So site assessment is basically to understand the site opportunities and limitations. And there could be opportunities, not always limitations. And how do we go from this, which is a building site left over after some buildings that you can't see were constructed, and this was the leftover staging area. And the company said to the city of Ithaca, said, well, now you can make this into a park. Here, we give it to you. And so, yeah, we took it. And so we can go from a pretty lousy looking site where you can see a lot of poor drainage, standing water. Of course, there's a lot of garbage. We can get rid of that. But the soil in mostly has been disturbed or destroyed in a large part. That makes it very difficult. But with using a bunch of techniques, we can go from this to this, the same site, using various techniques, not just plant selection, but dealing with soil problems that enable a really beautiful landscape to be formed. So looking above ground just for a minute, we get reflected heat from sidewalks and buildings, asphalt, because it really does increase the stress around urban trees that are experiencing this, this kind of condition. Basically decreases humidity, increases temperature, and increases the rate at which water is lost from tree leaves. Thinking of tree leaves as basically an open pan of water with some resistance, the hotter and drier it is, the faster water is going to be lost from those leaves. And I love this picture to show you here. This is a great picture taken with an infrared camera, a camera that measures surface heat. And so you can see, get the arrow here. Come on, arrow. No, it's not going to do. So I'll basically, you can see these tree trunks in the park here. And you see on the right-hand side a scale of temperature in Fahrenheit, from the dark blue being 67 degrees, and then the light green, yellowish, is about 82 degrees, up to the red, which is about 105 degrees temperature. And you can see these tree trunks and a dark blue blob around them, and that is trees creating shade in the grass, and the temperature being quite cooler, about 67 degrees in the shade of those trees. Whereas you go into the light green area in front of that, you get about 82 degrees on grass in the sun. So the surface of that grass is quite a bit warmer than on the shade of those trees. And I'm sure you can all guess what this big orange thing at the bottom is, which is the sidewalk, concrete or asphalt sidewalk. We're up to 105 degrees. And we talk about an urban heat island being, as a general, 2 to 4 degrees warmer than the surrounding countryside. But on a microsite, you can have much hotter and drier conditions if you're near sidewalks, asphalt, roadways, parking lots, than you would in general, looking at those 2 to 4 degree generalities. In a microsite, you can have a much hotter and drier condition. And then the soil conditions. Well, I mean, we've all seen this kind of devastation, construction. I love can you see the protection of the tree there, that little orange snow fence? I mean, that's doing a lot. I can say it's not doing a lot, but we really do a lot of damage to the soil and the trees when we're doing construction in any part of the country, in any part of the world. It's a major issue. And even on the beautiful Cornell campus, which I'm taking a bird's eye view here of the agricultural quad, which is one of the buildings was reconstructed, took 3 years, and what we're looking at is that quadrangle with all the construction. Basically it was 3 years of construction trailers and machinery and basically doing a tremendous destruction to the soil on that site. And this is, you wouldn't consider this a terribly urban site, but it is because of how the soil was destroyed in this process. And so we see with soils, when we have compaction, we're going to have issues basically of reduction of root growth in the soil. There's tremendous root impedance when soils get this dense. And we can know what density it was where where roots can be impeded. But definitely when this brick-like soil here, no root's going to get through that. So that's a problem. You have a lack of soil volume caused by density of the soil, bulk density. And then often at times when we have a high bulk density, a high level of compaction, all those big macropores in the soil that help water drain are going to be crushed, and we have a very poor drainage. And you can see this after construction or after there have been roadways where it's been rain and you see the tire tracks full with water and they may not drain for hours or even days, where you have just very, very poor drainage caused by soil compaction. So I generally say that soil and the site trumps trees. I mean, basically, if you have the greatest tree in the world and you have really lousy soil, your soil is going to trump, is going to be more important than the trees that you put in there. Up to a point. We can make some plant selections, which I'll talk about. Here you see a parking island, a typical place we see in many parts of our urban environment, and you can see these trees are not doing very well, some red oak trees. And the right, top right, you see that parking island as it was being reconstructed, and after a rainfall, just a bathtub, literally a bathtub, with water not draining. And so the tree on your left is experiencing that really poorly drained condition where the roots are dying due to lack of oxygen. And of course, we could have made better selections to choose a tree that would tolerate that kind of poor drainage, but that wasn't done in this case. So the plant selection criteria, let's just talk about plants for a minute, because we all love plants and trees, and there's some things we really need to think about before we kind of do the same kind of plants we've always been doing in the past. We need to choose pest-resistant plants adapted to site conditions. So not only the pest and disease issue, but the site conditions, adapted to the site conditions, or if not, we're going to have to change the site conditions. We need to choose non-invasive, highly diverse plantings. So unfortunately, a lot of our plants in our cities are pretty low diversity, lots of a few species, lots of, in fact, this is all over the world. Generally 4 or 5 species make up over 50% of most of our urban trees. We have to make sure that the trees meet the design and functional objectives. If we want stormwater management, we need shade, we need windbreaks, we need pollinator habitat. We need to think about what are the design or functional objectives of our planting. And then finally, very importantly, we have to look at our management limitations or opportunities and see, does this planting match the management limitations which may be in any particular site. I remember a place where, a site where someone planted trees that should have been pollarded, been very highly pruned every year, but there was no opportunity, there was no money to actually do this kind of pollarding or pruning, and so those trees just grew out and the design was not fulfilled. So I'm going to talk a little bit about diversity before we get into the nuts and bolts of drought and wet. And this is just a graphic showing that we have very low diversity at many cities. This is in New York State, looking at the genus. Acer or maples make up about 45% of all the street trees in New York State, where oaks and honey locusts and lindens come in and, between 4 and 7%. So we're talking about 4 species here making up over 50% of the street tree population for a state. And this is not unusual. We think New Jersey and Pennsylvania also have the same basic condition. New England also, even more maples as you go further north. But this is not a sustainable practice, and we're reaping the benefits or the problems of doing this kind of low genetic diversity. Here we can see the ultimate street tree. This is an old picture, sorry for the lack of quality, but this is probably in the 1940s on the Cornell campus, and you can see the clock tower in the back. And we have, of course, the beautiful American elms, which were famous for the cathedral-like quality they gave to the streets. And this was a great tree. It basically had it all. It could tolerate wet, it could tolerate dry, beautiful shape, fairly pest resistant at that time, and it transplanted easily and so on. And we look at the same site, basically in 1950s, it's the same clock tower right there. All the elms are gone. Of course, Dutch elm disease wiped them out. And in some communities, even 75 or 80% of the trees were American elms. Fast forward a couple more decades, and now we have London plane trees on that same street, the same clock tower. And I'm afraid that the learning curve is fairly flat here. Again, the same trees, the same uniformity alley, and this is going to be a problem down the road, and it could be even now. So what we want to think about is a more diverse habitat and diverse plantings for urban trees. We know now that many parts of the country have suffered from emerald ash borer, the top, that little green guy on the top, and many parts of the country have also suffered from Asian longhorn beetle, which is a much more devastating insect, which has a large host range: maples, horse chestnuts, poplars, willows, elms, a huge host range. And so that's these pests there always have been pests, there always have been diseases that affect our urban forests, but it's happening faster now with our global economy and shipping and people moving around, and that these pests and diseases are coming one way or the other faster than they had in the past. So diversity is the key, and we can see what happened here in Worcester, Massachusetts before the Asian longhorn beetle was found there, and the Forest Service rightly is taking a very aggressive approach at eliminating those host species that the Asian longhorn beetle feeds on. But look at before the beetle and look at after the beetle. So this is a huge effect in terms of the health of the urban forest and how it affects people, how it affects the livability of our cities, and we really want to think about this diversity issue in a big way. So let's get into some species, just thinking about diversity. I'm not going to do it in A to Z, which much as I'd like to, but we've got lots more to cover. So here's just one of the great small trees, a very drought-tolerant tree. This is a crabapple. This happens to be a cultivar called Professor Springer. Bad name, but a great tree. And this has one of the, I mentioned this crabapple, which you all know, but there's a really good rating system for the 4 major diseases which crabapples do get, which is basically fire blight, apple scab, powdery mildew, and cedar apple rust. And there's no point in planting a tree where we do know about the disease resistance, to plant a tree just because it looks beautiful for 2 weeks in the year and then defoliates the rest of the time. So there is good information about crabapples in terms of resistance to these diseases, and we should use that information. There are also new, smaller trees for more restricted sites or for under wires. This happens to be the wireless cultivar of Zelkova serrata. It looks very much like Zelkova, but it is basically at its really mature height here, about 20 feet, and very useful for those more restricted spaces. This tree you may not be familiar with, just as a close-up here, this is Eucomia ulmoides, or hardy rubber tree. And it used to be thought that this was not hardy above or colder than zone 7, but it is perfectly hardy in zone 5, at least 5B for sure. And here we have it, seeing it on the streets of New York City. The hardy rubber tree, a great shiny leaf tree with very few pests and very much a drought-tolerant species. One of the trees I like a lot, which is not used enough, is Kentucky coffee tree, Gymnocratus dioicus, a beautiful specimen here, growing on the streets of Ithaca, beautiful branching habit, great drought tolerance, and good ornamental characteristics in terms of fall color and so on. This is a tree you may not be so familiar with on one of the oaks. This is Quercus muhlenbergii, or chinkapin oak. This is a tree that prefers alkaline soil, of which we have a lot in the urban areas. And here you see growing on in a very restricted area, growing in an alkaline soil, a very high pH, about 8.2, doing very, very well. So choosing drought-tolerant and alkaline soil-tolerant trees can be a really good suggestion as well. And here's another great oak. This is called Regal Prince oak, or the scientific name is Quercus warei long. It's a hybrid between swamp white oak, Quercus bicolor, and English oak, Quercus robur, and it has some of the best qualities of both. It's narrow as the upright English oak is, but it has some of the tolerance of wet soils that swamp white oak have, and it's also resistant to mildew, which can really affect the English oaks. So great tree for a narrow space. And this is a tree that many of you will recognize. This is golden rain tree, Quercus paniculata. It was introduced to this country by Thomas Jefferson, oddly enough, and has since been introduced since then. But these are some Korean selections that are a little bit squatter and are tremendous drought-tolerant trees. Perhaps one of the greatest drought-tolerant trees that we have in our deciduous species. So it is one that I've seen growing in Texas and Southern California and New York, and it is really tough tree for both hot and dry conditions. And just another tree that I hope someone would try to plant. On the right, you see an old smoke bush, which is kind of this is Cotinus cajugrea on the right, which is the European smoke bush. But on the left, that's the American smoke bush, Cotinus obovatus. And this is a great potential tree for, it's much more tree-like than the smoke bush, the European, but our American smoke bush is much more tree-like, maybe 1 or 2 stems, or you can get it single stem, and it is much more drought tolerant and great fall color, as you see here. Okay, so
hey Nina,
yeah,
before you go
sure.
on, Nina, before you go on, could you please, somebody wanted to know what the species of was, not the last tree you just mentioned, but the one right before that. So you can scroll back in the slides if you need to refresh your memory.
This is Quercus.
Yeah, that one.
Quercus paniculata. Golden rain tree. Okay? Yeah, I expected there'd be a lot. I'm going to now talk about a database where you can find out a lot about the site conditions and the trees that will deal with various site conditions. This is something we've been working on for over 10 years. It's open to anybody. It's the Woody Plant database. And you can, as you can see, you can put, get that, let's see if I can get that. There we go. The arrow is not paying attention to me this time.
I don't know, maybe you have to hover over or grab the green
arrow
arrow with your mouse and then move it?
Not doing it. Anyway, I will show, just explain that you'll see in the left-hand side there's a botanical name or a common name, and you can search and press search, and you can get a page which has that particular plant in it, a woody plant. These are only woody plants, so trees, shrubs, vines, ground covers. Or you can search the database based on site characteristics. So let me just show you the next page what you could go to if you wanted to look at a site and get plants that tolerated those site conditions. So here is, again, you could have just your botanical common name, but you could also just, instead of doing that at all, choose the size of woody plant you would like, the deciduous or evergreen quality, the light condition, the hardiness zone. We only go to zone 7 on this, so sorry for the southern folks, but the trees wouldn't probably be appropriate for you anyway. Looking at the acidic quality of the soil, what either it requires acid soil or can tolerate into the neutral zone or can tolerate acid to alkaline soil, so a wide range of adaptability. And you can look at many books and you'll see that a tree will say, well, it prefers moist, acid soil, and so on and so forth. But that's the Goldilocks of soil conditions. We want to know where a tree can tolerate to, not just, well, every tree can do well in slightly acid, moist conditions. Where can we push this to? Can it go to neutral zone? Can it go to alkaline soil? And fortunately, many, many plants can. Also, we have the salt spray issue or salt in the soil. And then down at the bottom, we can look at whether it tolerates occasionally saturated or very wet soil, up to periods of prolonged dry soil. So this is, and you can actually click, if they're square, you can click on more than one. If they're round, you have only one choice. So then I'm just going to show you what a search might look like. Here we have looking at trees that can tolerate both wet and dry soil, which is about 11 different trees here. And you can see just a few on the screen. And so when you see that little thumbnail picture or the text right next to it, you can go to a particular tree. Here happens to be swamp white oak, Quercus bicolor, and you get a whole picture, whole page, and many, many pictures of this tree and talking about other qualities of the tree. And you can even print the PDF of this. And you can have a little podcast. You can hear me talking about some of the identification features of this tree. So we hope that many people will use this woody plant database. It's putting more and more things in it all the time. But it's a way to look at your site conditions and get a bunch of trees that can tolerate those site conditions and then choose among them based on whatever other features you're interested in. And we're doing quite a lot of work here at Cornell on selecting trees for drought tolerance and alkaline soil tolerance. These are hybrid oaks that we've been developing for about 25 years. We actually crossed, these are all in the white oak family. We crossed about 5 mother plants here at Cornell with pollen of the white oak group from all over the world, and so have very unique white oak crosses, which we have screened now for tolerance to alkalinity. We have about 25 really good trees that can tolerate very high alkaline soils in this group. And we're now looking at them for drought tolerance and salt tolerance as well. So this is a long-term project, and it's still, we're getting better and better at it. Here are a couple of 2-year-old clones. We can propagate these asexually to get clones of these, so we don't have to wait for acorns, or since grafting of oaks is difficult. And here's a really unusual one, bur oak, Quercus macrocarpa, times Quercus turbinella, on a western sort of Arizona desert oak. Has very unusual leaves, but it's a true hybrid, and we have some of these that we'll be testing as well. So this is kind of for the future, but it's coming in the next 5 to 10 years that we'll have some of these very unusual oaks that will be drought tolerant of alkaline soils, and salt as well as disease resistance. We want to throw everything in. So limits of plant selection. Yes, you can choose plants that are more or less disease and insect resistant. You can choose plants that are going to deal with your size constraints above ground, below ground. You can choose trees that are hot or cold tolerant based on your climates, where you're at. You can choose trees that can tolerate some poor drainage. You get more limited there, but there are trees that will tolerate some poor drainage. You can choose trees that will tolerate dry soils, but up to a point. There is a point after which, as my friend in Arizona would say, no water, no soil, no plants. So you need to have some water to be able to deal with exceptionally dry soils. pH, yes, you can definitely choose trees that tolerate a wide range of pH and salt somewhat. We don't have great information on salt tolerance. But when it comes to compaction, soil compaction, there are no trees that can tolerate the levels of compaction we see after construction in urban environments. We need to think about modifying the soil to actually make that soil more usable. So this is what we like. This is the good stuff. We like this part of it. But the required compaction due to laying of pavement requires that the soil be compacted so that our pavements won't fail. This is a purposeful compaction when you have pavement. And we get this kind of loss of structure, which we've seen before. We get this blue-gray color of soil where you have no oxygen in the soil, a very compacted looking soil here. And we see the effect of restricted amounts of soil where we have on the left a large amount of soil and on the right a small kind of tree pit or vault, and the same willow oaks here growing very, very differently depending on their amount of soil. And when we try to put trees into pavement here and tree pits, we have very little soil for those trees to deal with. And you can see when you have trees near pavement where there's been a lot of compaction, the tree roots are really not getting out at all into either the lower soil or the area of the parking lot, as you see here. Quite a dramatic picture. So lack of soil trumps trees. A number of things you can do to increase the volume of soil that trees can do, and that's going to increase the drought tolerance of trees, as well as we can deal with also the too wet kind of conditions as well. When we look at trees, and you can see what people have always said, well, I've seen trees in a little bit of space and they're growing fine. Well, I can tell you the roots are not where you think they are. Well, here we look at a big Norway maple and a tree lawn, and those roots are under the sidewalk, into somebody's front yard, into somebody's backyard, and that's why the tree is growing as well as it is. It's not because the roots are staying restricted in that small tree lawn area. We've done something called developed structural soil, which I'm not going to go into in great detail here, but it's basically looking at the angular white pieces or pieces of gravel which touch each other, and in the large pore spaces in between we put a heavy clay soil to allow roots to shoot through, as well as allow that compaction to take place, which needs to occur under pavement. So we have a kind of rigid lattice with soil in the pores that allows trees to grow through it, as well as having the compaction that engineers require. That's what it looks like when it's first mixed. And we've grown trees in sidewalks to nowhere, many places, so we can test this out. Here we have some Acerplatanoides and CU structural soil. Oops, what happened there? Okay, now here are the roots growing through structural soil. So we see that the roots can grow really vigorously through this kind of rigid lattice, which is compacted to bear loads of pavement. Oops, what happened to my slides? Hello? There's some reason why the slides are not progressing. It has a very small root system, was not able to explore a large volume of soil, and the tree has to just tolerate drought because it can't avoid it because it's not able to get enough water from the root system. So we look at trees from both avoider and tolerator, and most trees have both strategies to some degree, but we're very interested in those that can tolerate really poor droughty conditions because of a restricted rooting space. Where we can get more rooting space, that's much more a good thing to do. The next slide, can you move to the next one? Okay, that's showing a ground penetrating radar system where we can actually look for where roots are under pavement or under soil and measure the root growth and see where the roots have gotten to, how much have they been able to explore. The next slide, you see basically a red root coming out from a tree, and that's where we tested the ground penetrating radar to see, well, if we took off the sod and used an air spade to uncover the roots, was the ground penetrating radar accurate to what we were seeing really in the ground, to the visual truth? And it was quite accurate in many cases. The next slide is just a graph showing the fact that the more rooting volume you have, the greater the crown volume will be. I mean, it's pretty and pretty kind of self-explanatory. The more roots you have, the better the tree will grow. And so you cannot, basically say you can grow the same size tree in a small amount of soil. You really need to think about finding enough volume that will allow the tree to grow. Next slide. Here we see a parking lot which is part porous asphalt and part traditional asphalt. We can go to the next slide. You can see the juxtaposition of porous on the left or porous on the right to traditional asphalt back to back. We planted trees in both the traditional asphalt and the porous asphalt with structural soil underneath to see, did it really make a difference to have porous asphalt? The next picture is showing those trees about 10 years after we planted them in the parking lot where we had porous and non-porous asphalt. So the next picture I'm going to show you is a picture of a colored lines. And you can see in the middle of that slide there's looks like tree 3 and 4. Those are the trees, and to the either side of that is structural soil with non-porous asphalt. And we were looking at the root density of these trees in non-porous traditional asphalt. And you can see the bluer the color connotes less root activity. The hotter orange or brown color means more root activity. And so the trees were growing okay in structural soil under traditional asphalt. But I want to show you the difference between traditional asphalt, non-porous, and porous asphalt will be the next slide. Now you can see these are trees 8 and 9, and the very proliferation of roots in under porous asphalt is extraordinary. Not just at the surface, but for the full depth of the structural soil, which went down to about 28 inches in this particular instance. And so these trees that are in the porous asphalt with structural soil are growing much better and much bigger than those in traditional asphalt, both with structural soil. So not as if the trees weren't growing, but the trees with porous asphalt are growing faster and are much bigger. So we're really seeing a difference. If we can get the water to the tree, even in a paved situation, by using porous pavements, the trees will grow better. Next slide. Oops, let me get my... So I just want to briefly, I know we're running out of time, just talk about remediation of soil, getting soil that roots can actually penetrate in a non-paved situation. Here you see a construction site right on Cornell Quad at Ithaca. The next picture shows what we call the scoop and dump method, which is a really low-tech method for remediating soils that have been terribly compacted through construction or some other activity. And here what we do, with early research, we found that we could increase the drainage and the reduced compaction of soils by adding a tremendous amount of organic matter, basically 1/4 to 1/3 by volume. 1/3 by volume would mean 2 scoops of soil to 1/3 scoop of organic matter, compost. Mix that and even allow it to compact again, and still all that organic matter would not allow it to compact. And it also increases the drainage. So here we are doing on a large scale where we put about 6 or 8 inches of compost on a compacted site and came in with a bucket and scooped down 18 inches, lifting both the compacted soil and the compost up and then dropping it. So scoop and dump is literally the process we've done. And of course I know that if you add a lot of organic matter you can reduce the density. That's great, but that organic matter will be eaten up over time and you will lose it. You'll have subsidence. But what we've done for over 14 years, we have really great data on this. is, of course, we would plant the site and then mulch it with shredded pine bark, shredded bark, and we mulch it every year. And by doing this, well, I would say by adding so much organic matter at first, we feed the microorganisms in the soil, so they really proliferate. Then we add the mulch, and those microorganisms are able to use the mulch on top and continue to replenish the organic matter, bring that mulch in and replenish it into that soil. But we mulch every year. We don't know how long we have to stop mulching, but we've had in many cases, I'll go to the next slide, we've increased the, sure. Right. Just a few more slides.
Dr. Bass, I'm just going to interrupt
Okay,
you
so
for
the
one.
scoop and dump
Just gonna
method basically has all these great qualities.
It is 1 o'clock my time, and I'm just going to say if you have to leave the meeting room, I certainly understand. Thanks again for showing up, but we would really invite you to stick around.
We actually get
I can see you're almost finished with your PowerPoint, so just wanted to
the long
put that
time
little plug in there. But
of
yeah,
this.
thank you
our
so
next
much.
Slide. This is really interesting. We went from 0 to 12 years. Looking at the 12-year-old site, which we had done this technique to, we actually reduced the bulk density over time by this method. We only incorporate compost once, but then we would mulch it every year, and we were increasing or we were decreasing or improving the bulk density over time, which is really an extraordinary feature, because if you decrease bulk density, you allow your roots to penetrate in a large area and get the water and nutrients that they need. And the next are just a few slides of those scoop and dump projects we've done. You can go through them fairly quickly. We actually plant so that we have canopy coverage in a matter of 2 or 3 years. So we have very little weed pressure. You can go through the third slide now. These are all sites that have been done this way. Even there's a site in New York City where we, you see the area there on the West Side Highway where there's the soil that allows those trees to grow for a large volume of soil there. We have some trees also in Ithaca growing in structural soil underground, able to get a large volume of soil, which is going to decrease drought and also increase drainage in many cases. The final slide here is of a famous plaza in New York City where these honey locusts are growing in structural soil. So the whole plaza is used as a volume. So these trees are avoiding drought because they're seeing so much more soil volume. And the Gladidias, the honey locusts, also are fairly tolerator type trees as well. So we have the best of both worlds here. We have a tree that can tolerate drought, and yet we're avoiding those trees seeing drought by having a large volume of soil underneath the pavement for them to grow in. So my last slide is just the Urban Horticulture Institute website, where there's a lot of information. There's information on all the different topics I talked about today, and we just sort of touched on a very few of them, but I would hope that people would go to that site and get more information. And also email me if there's something that you would specifically want to know. So thank you. I'm sorry again about the slides, but at least we got to the end.